Following the lower viewing figures for the Cologne Major in 2016, it's good to see that they're back up again for the latest major. Not only that, but the peak viewing figures in the tournament just gone were the highest the game has ever seen. But it begs the question, how have the CSGO majors been doing since the game's release, over 4 years ago? This isn't as easy to track as you might think. Viewing them on CSGO's inbuilt tournament viewer, it only goes back as far as Dreamhack 2014. And these are the figures that I'll be going by for this video, since they're about as reliable as I can hope for this analysis. But it's worth noting that, particularly in the Cluj-Napoca tournament back in 2015, other streaming services such as Hitbox were used, and that viewing matches through sites such as this one may not have added to the viewing figures for the major. Now, it's impossible for me to calculate these numbers or even to comment on the credibility of these claims. Dreamhack did provide figures of the tournament themselves, which showed peak viewers just shy of 1 million. This number was 40,000 more than I got for the tournament using CSGO's inbuilt tournament viewer stats. So I'm happy that the figures I have aren't too different from what was officially claimed by the tournament's host. So, CSGO stats are what I'll be going by. But there were 3 majors before the inbuilt tournament viewer was added. How to get figures for these? I manually went through the recordings on YouTube, keeping track of the peak viewing figures that could be seen during the buy time of every round, just here. Fortunately, this was almost always highest on the final round, and even then, it varied very little with the rounds before. So I'm confident that I've got some pretty reliable numbers for every match from the quarterfinals onward for every major to date. Here are the peak views for every major. These were all achieved during the grand finals, with no exceptions. You can really see the game take off in 2015, though honestly, I was surprised by how high they were even in the first major, far back in 2013. Remember that this whole video is talking about peaks. Averages are far harder to work out. But since the grand finals are all best of 3s, we can see how the viewing numbers vary even between different maps of the same match. No analysis needed, just an interesting graph. As if there's such thing as boring graphs. But a major isn't just a final match. You have quarterfinals, semi-finals, and then the grand final itself. You'd expect views to go up as the tournament progresses, and sure enough, that's what happens. There are a few exceptions. Let's take a look at these. Dreamhack Winter 2014 is the one instance where the semi-finals were, on average, viewed more than the grand final. The tournament was hosted in Sweden, and Ninjas in Pyjamas, a very popular Swedish team, made it to the grand finals, so I'm not sure why this would be the case. The popular Virtus.pro and Na'Vi did get knocked out during the semis, but the final game was still NiP vs LDLC, a very respectable matchup that went on to the third map and ended with overtime, with LDLC being the winners. It was with this third and final map that brought the viewing figures up and achieved the highest peak of any match in the tournament. But the first 2 maps of the finals were lower than any of the semi-final matches. Why was this? It could be because the semis and finals were all played on the same day. That's a lot of CSGO. And perhaps viewers were losing interest by the 6th consecutive match and instead left and only tuned in to watch the end. This could explain why the next major held the final on a separate day, but semis and finals have been on the same day since, and viewing figures have only gone up as the day has progressed. So it's a bit of a strange one. Columbus 2016 has been one of the most successful majors that CSGO has ever had, but its quarterfinals were more viewed than its semi-finals. But this is a bit easier to explain, since NiP, Fnatic and Virtus.pro all got knocked out during the quarterfinals. These are all very strong and popular teams, and this is reflected in their matches' viewing numbers. Virtus.pro vs Luminosity was the one quarter-final match to be played the following day, just before the 2 semi-finals, and indeed it was watched significantly more than either of those 2 were. Because of this, I suspect the viewing numbers largely reflect the popularity of the teams playing. Despite all this, the grand final the following day still managed to be the most viewed match of the tournament. But is CSGO dying? Judging from the peak views, it seems like it's died several times. Then comes back again. Could this be because Valve isn't updating the game? Or maybe from the gambling ban? I have another idea. Viewers suffer from burnout. This happens when too many matches are played. What's the point in watching a tournament when it's just showing the same teams that play each other every week already? Looking at their match history, it must help that none of the big teams played in the weeks leading up to this event. Though looking back, this seems to be normal for majors, probably because teams take time out to practice and to prepare for the big one. But one way in which this major has been different has been in the amount of time since the previous. The last was back in Cologne last July, over half a year ago. This is the longest gap between majors that CSGO has ever seen. This is the number of days between the start of every major. If we abuse the graphs by multiplying all of the days by 6,000, then we can see a very strong correlation between the number of views and how long it's been since the previous tournament. I'm not saying that this is the reason, but it strongly suggests that how popular a major is depends on how long it's been since the last one. So it makes sense that this most recent one has done so well, as it has been a record-breaking 200 days, roughly, since the one before it. Another fun fact, this tournament had a day's gap between the qualifiers and the quarterfinals. In the past, the first quarterfinal match has typically been played the following morning, just 12 hours after the previous match ended. This day off probably doesn't make a huge difference, but does give viewers time to recover, to get the washing done, and to get excited for the rest of the tournament. And now the final question. How successful is CSGO right now? I mean, we've just had an incredibly successful major that has broken all sorts of records, but it could just be because we've not had a major in a while, and the average views per stage don't paint such a pretty picture. Sure, this tournament saw the highest peak during the finals, but on average it's only been the second most viewed grand finals, second most watched semi-finals, and third most watched quarterfinals that CSGO has ever seen. Actually, that still sounds pretty good. And also, remember that Cloud9 and Ninjas in Pyjamas, two of the most popular teams, didn't even make it to this tournament. This to me is a great sign for CSGO that a tournament could be so strong without even featuring two of America's and Europe's favourite teams. All of the quarterfinals reached the third map, which always helps the viewership by giving all teams their moment of glory. And although the two semis were over in 2 maps, the final was 3 very closely matched games. Indeed, I've seen many people saying that in terms of games, this major has had some of the best that CSGO has ever had. As for players, the week of the major saw 815,000 players connecting to CSGO. The highest it's been since the Columbus Major in March last year, and the 4th highest week of all time. I guess that time will tell how quickly the game's popularity will drop off following the major, but I'm very pleased with how it's gone. CSGO might not be growing like it once was, but it has shown that it can hit highs time and time again, regardless of the questionable updates and gambling scandals that have been thrown its way. I'm more interested than ever to know which event Valve considers for the next major. If it's soon, then I'm going to take that as a strong sign that Valve is confident about CSGO's future. Let's see if the next can be as well received as this one has been.